Today, we're diving into one of the most amazing stories in all of archaeology, and really all of faith, the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. We are going to unpack how these ancient texts solved a mystery that had puzzled experts for centuries, and what they show us about a truly pivotal moment in history.
So, this is the big question, right? For ages, critics have pointed out what seems like a pretty logical problem. How could a text like the Old Testament possibly stay reliable? I mean, think about it, like a huge 2,000-year-long game of telephone. You know how that goes? With every single copy made by hand, wouldn't the message get a little warped over time? That was the major doubt hanging over these ancient scriptures. And this timeline really shows you the problem perfectly. See, before the 1940s, the oldest complete copy of the Hebrew Bible we had was something called the Leningrad Codex. It dates to around the year 1000. But the originals, they were written well over 1,000 years before that. And this giant gap, this is where all the skepticism crept in. What could have possibly happened to the text in that millennium of silence? Well, the answer, as it turns out, would come from the most unlikely place imaginable, all thanks to a stray goat and just a moment of pure dumb luck. The story doesn't start in some fancy library, but out on the desolate, rocky cliffs of the Judean desert. Okay, so picture this. It's 1947. You're a teenage Bedouin shepherd, Mohammed F. Deeb, and you're looking for a lost goat. You see a dark hole on a cliff, you chuck a rock in there, hoping to scare it out, but instead of a baa, you hear the crash of breaking pottery. So he climbs inside, and he finds these old clay jars filled with these leather-wrapped bundles. He had absolutely no idea he just stumbled upon the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century. In fact, he actually thought the ancient goatskin might make for some good sandal straps. So, who on earth put these scrolls in the caves? To really get the treasure, first we have to get the people who buried it. And let me tell you, they were a truly unique and dedicated bunch. Meet the Essenes. You can kind of think of them as the ultimate desert preppers of the ancient world. They were convinced that the religious leaders back in Jerusalem had gotten corrupt, so they just packed up and retreated to this settlement at Qumran, right there by the Dead Sea. They were laser-focused on ritual purity and, most importantly, meticulously copying manuscripts. Why? Because they were absolutely sure the apocalypse was just around the corner and they had to preserve God's true word for the end. So, when the Roman armies finally invaded around 70 CE, they hid their entire precious library in these caves for safekeeping, probably hoping to come back for it. They never did.
So what was actually in those jars? What was in this ancient library that was about to turn the world of biblical scholarship completely on its head?
The sheer scale of what they found is just staggering. I mean, look at that number. Over the next decade, in 11 different caves, archaeologists uncovered fragments of around 900 distinct manuscripts. This wasn't just a couple of forgotten books. This was an entire, comprehensive library, literally frozen in time.
And what was in this library was so diverse. First, you have the biblical texts, and they found pieces of every single book of the Old Testament, except for Esther. Maybe its story of palace life was a little too worldly for them. Who knows? Then they had their own community rulebooks, which were kind of like an Essene employee handbook, spelling out their super strict way of life. And then you get the really wild stuff, like the War Scroll, a literal, honest-to-goodness battle plan for the final apocalyptic war between the Sons of Light and the Sons of Darkness. And if you want a little taste of just how intense these guys were, get this. This is a direct quote from their rulebook. Can you even imagine getting formally punished just for laughing too loud? It just shows a level of discipline and seriousness that is almost impossible for us to even wrap our heads around today. Okay, so all of this discovery, all this digging and cataloging, it was all building up to one critical moment. The moment scholars could finally put these ancient scrolls side by side with the much, much later texts they'd been using for centuries. This was the moment of truth. So here's the bottom line. These scrolls were over 1,000 years older than any complete biblical manuscript that we knew of. This was it, the ultimate test. Had the text drifted over that huge gap in time? Was that whole game of telephone theory correct? I mean, the stakes for biblical scholarship just could not have been any higher. And the result? It was breathtaking. When scholars compared the great Isaiah scroll from the Qumran caves with a version from the Leningrad Codex written 1,000 years later, they were virtually identical. The differences were so tiny, like minor spelling variations. Think of it like the ancient equivalent of spelling the word color with a U or without one. The actual message was perfectly preserved. It turns out the ancient scribes had been unbelievably meticulous. That 1,000-year gap, that so-called millennium of silence, was finally closed. The game of telephone, it never happened.
But, proving the text's accuracy was really only half the story. These scrolls also have this profound spiritual significance. They give us this unbelievable window into the Jewish world right before the dawn of Christianity.
Yeah, you can really think of the Dead Sea Scrolls as a bridge, a kind of missing link connecting the Old and New Testaments. They show us a culture that was just buzzing with expectation for a Messiah. The writings of the Essenes are filled with phrases like a teacher of righteousness, and they're always talking about this cosmic war between light and dark. So then, when you read the Gospel of John and you hear Jesus say, "I am the light of the world," you realize, wow, he's stepping right into a conversation that had already been going on for generations. The scrolls give us the context.
But the story doesn't just end there in some neat academic bow. Oh no, the history of the scrolls after their discovery is just as messy and human and fascinating as their origins. This has got to be one of my favorite parts of the whole story. Can you even believe this? Some of the first scrolls to make it to America were literally advertised for sale in the Wall Street Journal. In 1954, a Syrian archbishop placed this ad asking for $250,000. It just shows you the chaotic, almost unbelievable journey these priceless artifacts took from a dusty desert cave to the world stage.
And that brings us all the way to today, where, thankfully, all that drama is over. You no longer have to place a classified ad or deal with black market antiquities dealers to see these things. Thanks to amazing digital imaging technology, you can go online right now for free and see high-resolution scans zooming right in on the actual ink strokes of a scribe from 2,000 years ago.
And in the end, there's just a beautiful poetry to this whole story. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul wrote about having this divine treasure in jars of clay. He was using it as a metaphor for our fragile human bodies holding something transcendent. And the scrolls, they are the literal embodiment of that very verse. God's word wasn't preserved in some golden vault or a royal palace. It was kept safe in common, breakable pottery, hidden in a dusty cave and found by a shepherd's lucky throw.
It's just a powerful reminder, isn't it? That sometimes the most profound truths and the most valuable treasures, they're hidden in the most humble, dusty, and unexpected places. It kind of makes you wonder what treasures might be waiting in the overlooked corners of your own world.